So hopefully a super quick video that figures out how to focus on my face and not the rope behind me. I had a couple of questions pop up lately that I've answered 100 times in person and in my classes and various other places in regards to, how long should my rope be, how many lengths of rope I should have, and these sorts of things. And it's been, my experience is skewed. I like what I call economy of method or economy of tool. And that is to say that you've got like a sort of one-size-fits-all approach, and your own technique and your own understanding, your own skill should compensate for the limitations of your tools. A lot of people, they want the right tool for the right situation. I personally don't take that approach. I take the other way around. I always say technique before technology, because you can't always count on having the right tool for the right job. And what if you don't have the right tool for the right job? You're screwbarred? Well, I hope not. Shaky camera here. Nice to have this just sitting here. Here we go. There we go. Let's try this again. I'm gonna just hang you off my rig, as one does, right? So that's not working. So my approach to that sort of thing has been always technique before technology. You need to develop yourself in such a way that your skill and your capacity compensates for the shortcomings of your tools. You can't always rely on something like rope, certainly, that changes its properties every time you handle it, to compensate for everything forever. That just doesn't make sense. Hope this comes in well, audio-wise. I don't think it is because I've got music in the background. Okay, it's not working. Whatever. So, in respect to that sort of thing, here we go. This should work poorly, lighting-wise. So yeah, in regards to that sort of thing, it's terrible lighting. Great. So in regards to that sort of thing, you need to recognize that your tools aren't always going to carry you. Your technique needs to be able to compensate for that. And if you're not used to your technique being the baseline for your style, your method, your whatever, then when your tools fail you, what are you going to fall back on? So your baseline should be your skill level. If you're new to this sort of thing, then you need to become familiar with your baseline. All right. So accordingly, to lessen the digression here, my personal approach is to always have the same length of rope. I really personally hate dealing with shorter lengths of rope here and there, and the odds and ends. The common statement we hear all the time is that there's only two lengths of rope. It's too long and too short. That's great, but if your capacity to be able to burn up extra rope is decent enough, then it doesn't matter if you've got too much rope. You find a place for it. But if you're too short of rope, there's nothing you can do about that besides add more rope. And what, you're short by a foot to finish off a tie, and you have to add, 30 feet of rope, 35 feet of rope. Well, that's not, that doesn't roll over well. That's a lot of burn up that can complicate what could be simple and safe tie into something that's too complicated, and you've got too much extra rope burnt up all over the place, and someone's in a dangerous situation, you have to untie all that. So you want to avoid that sort of thing. And this is why I really uniformly work out a fixed length of rope. For myself, I go off of something I pulled out of two different scrolls, and then after the fact, Fujita Seiko's Zukai Hojujutsu, one of the texts I've been translating for ever. It's an easy translation. I just need to actually sit down and do the work. And I've got a lot of other work on my hands, but nonetheless, there's been the statement that a length of what they call honnawa, the main rope that makes up all the pretty ties for the resting rope of pre-modern Japan. There has been statements on 3 different sources now that I've come across that say to use something that is 5 fathoms. Use a length of rope that's 5 fathoms to your body proportions. And a fathom is basically stretching out both your hands fingertip to fingertip, that's a fathom for you. Excuse me, I just ate. And so when you're dealing with 5 fathoms like that, for me that's 28 feet. For the next person over, it might be 30 feet. But what it does is it's answering the question as to handling this rope under adverse situations. It's not accounting for the person you're tying and how much rope you need for their particular body. If you tie many different people, you can't account for that. You can only compensate for it. And this has worked tremendously well for me in the past. So for me, I use 28 feet of rope. It makes it really easy for me to take a spool of rope and cut it down to my length and go from there. Saves all sorts of time instead of measuring out to 30 feet as an average, or if you're in Japan, 25 feet as an average. 28 is a sweet spot for me. And I've been working with that for, 6 years now. It's worked great, honestly speaking. And so what that allows for is that when you're working in low light environments or loud, noisy environments, or environments with a lot of distractions, let's say a club, and I personally love performing at clubs. I love the loud bassy music. I love tying to that. I really like working with the lights and the sexiness, so on and so forth. Subspace down in Toronto, Ontario is brilliant for this. I love tying there. Love it to bits. So what that allows for is that when you're in a low light environment and there's a lot of these other distractions, you can feel your rope, you know how long it actually is, and when you're handling it, you can guesstimate that on the fly. Obviously, if you've been drinking or something and tying publicly, I don't recommend that as a professional on the subject. I don't recommend that. That can go south quick. But I'm not saying I've never done that. I'm speaking from personal experience. It's not a good idea. A drink or two, know your limit, no big deal. Intoxicated, wobbly sort of stride and shit, try not to do that. But in those low light environments, basically what you're looking at is a difficulty in being able to perceive the length of your rope on the fly unless you can feel it with your hands. And that's really important for that sort of situation. You tie an overhand knot, you tie an extension knot, and you can feel, that for me, if I'm handling a rope that's 5 fathoms, and it's folded in half, as is the Japanese method in Shibari and Kinbaku, then it only takes 2.5 full lengths of my arm to be able to get to the end. Now you can guesstimate this in your head very quickly without having to do like complex calculations or to look at the rope and try and measure it out and look at it. And that's inefficient in a low light environment. That's inefficient in a loud noise, or a high interruption and distraction environment. You want to reduce the amount of calculations you have to deal with on the fly when you're tying. I mean, by doing that, you're able to calculate a heck of a lot more because you're not distracted by the menial things like how long is your rope. And some people, they color code their rope. They have a length rope at their bite or on the ends where the whipping is, or the end knots, and they color code it. But in a club, colors are a great, wonderful thing, but you're bombarded by colors in low light environments. You got lasers and spotlights and colored spotlights all over the place. Those colors don't mean a heck of a lot. You get to do your best with trying to guesstimate them. And in that sort of environment, it's also dangerous. Like, it's recommended for people that have been doing this for a few years at least. So you need to be able to already know the length of your rope. In conventional environments, if I was sitting here with my general music, which is currently Cannibal Corpse, it's a throwback in my angry teen years, but if typical lighting like this, then yeah, it doesn't matter if you got a red thread on the end of your rope. That it tells you which length of rope you're dealing with. But see, in a club environment, it's dark by default, and then the lights that you're being bombarded with aren't clear white lights. They're here's a red light, here's a green light, here's a whatever, which adversely changes the colors of the threads that you're dealing with. So at that point, yeah, we've got ourselves a bit of a problem there, right? So that's kind of my official statement for myself and my approach and what I recommend to my students in regards to the length of rope to use, and that sort of thing. If you want to deal with diameters, then yeah, 4 through to 6 diameter is decent. I've never had a 4 millimeter diameter rope crap out on me during a suspension, but I have found that suspensions have been more difficult because it bites in more. 6 millimeter, the weight's distributed differently and frankly both safer and more comfortably. And obviously you've got way more fiber, so you can suspend from that. But I digress again for the bazillionth time. Simply put, know your rope length. My personal approach, my personal recommendation is to work with a uniform length of rope. Some big names that have been in the industry for 30 years swear against my approach, and they do prefer 2 or 3 different lengths of rope. It's great and awesome. If it works for them, you can't argue with results. But for me, it makes a lot of sense to have one uniform length of rope. That narrows out a huge, extremely important calculation I don't even have to worry about, ever. It's great. Yeah, and for me, I recommend 5 fathoms. It has been a sweet spot for my workings. Very rarely, or more specifically, uncommonly, to put it on a rarity hierarchy, it's uncommon that that particular length is a problem. It's very uncommon that the connector knots place themselves right on the radial nerve or ulnar nerve or right on the chest or anything like this. Anything really uncomfortable or dangerous. I haven't had that. I don't have that problem very often, and it's always dependent on the bottom's body type or body size. In which case, at that point, you can't control that. You can only compensate for it. And I highly recommend being open to compensating for such things because we're not all built the same. So, I digress for the bajillionth time, and I should probably end this very shortly. It's already 12 minutes. Just wanted to get that out there, sort of like official statement. If anyone's asking me what length of rope I recommend, I like 5 fathoms, 5 full arm spans. That's both your arms stretched out, fingertip to fingertip. This has been extremely practical for me. It's made a lot of sense, and it's catered to my own personal sense of aesthetics. Some people default to 30 feet because a nice rounded number is a nice rounded number. Some people default to 25 feet because 25 and 26 feet have been recommended by the Japanese, who tend to deal with smaller people. There's no real right answer for that, but I think my system is a practical one, and that's all I can really support it with. Is it makes sense. Follow your ropes the same length, and you've got a method for measuring it out using your arm span. You can deal with it upside down, inside out, blindfolded, in low light environments, confusing environments like in club atmospheres. You know what you're working with every time. And if, let's say, your bottom or your model is extra well rounded, if I may say, then you get to calculate on the fly where to make those connector knots that don't dig into the body. And it's way easier to control that in complicated and adverse environments than it is to figure out which length of rope you're working with. So again, you strive to reduce the amount of considerations and calculations you have to do on the fly in a live environment, and and then you can focus on the sexy things or the suspensions or the technical things, the other things that demand a lot of attention too. You don't want to overwork this thing when you're trying to create a flow and you're trying to inflict a sense of subspace or assist in a sense of subspace or these sorts of things with your partner. So there we go. I should stop talking now because it's like 1 a.m. Clearly, I've got my fatigue wrinkles showing, and I'm just really an ugly mug in the first place. So let's not elaborate on this any more than we should. Cheers. Stop.